This is Jen, the Liberty Lion. I know it's been a little while since I've been with you guys and posted a video on Austin's how to do things with words. The holidays start coming around and we find ourselves busier and busier. But I'm going to skip to the end of the book and I'm going to do lecture 12. Everything between lecture about 5, 6 to up to 12 is sort of reviewing what he'd already taught us in the first few lectures. So I'm going to go ahead and skip those and go on to lecture 12. And lecture 12 is probably the most important lecture in this book. And I sort of wish he'd put this at the front because it would have been a really good prelude to the information that he gives us. And I think it would have made it better or easier for us to understand if he had done that. But throughout his book, he uses words such as statement and sentence and utterance. And so instead of starting directly with lecture 12, I'm going to start with a book called Truth, Logic, and Language, or actually Language, Truth, and Logic by Alfred Jules Ayer. So I'm going to go over that. This is the red part here. So we're at lecture 12, Austin's book, How to Do Things with Words, but I've added in some information here. So I want to take a few minutes to insert this information from another book. It's called Language, Truth, and Logic by Alfred Jules Ayers. And he talks about the difference between a statement and a sentence. Now you could find this book online. I think I got it from Amazon. It may be free. I don't know. It's an older book. So sentence, he says, is any form of words that is grammatically significant shall be held to constitute a sentence, and that every indicative sentence, whether it's literally meaningful or not, shall be regarded as expressing a statement. Okay, since all sentences are not equivalent, there is not one statement that can all express it. So there's not a sentence that can, not a single sentence that can express every type of statement. So we have statements. A sentence makes a statement. Sentences express statements, he says. A sentence is a statement to convey the idea that a statement is a sentence that conveys a factual piece of information. Okay, so why is this important? Because in philosophy, the question, what do sentences mean, is a source of confusion. Philosophers mistook a sentence to be factual, but to say that indicative sentences mean propositions is legitimate, just as it is legitimate to say that sentences express statements. But all evidence should not be confused with statements of empirical fact. Empirical means that something is verifiable based on observation or experience, but not on theory or pure logic. Empirical things are provable facts. Okay, so just real quick, provable facts, they can be looked at as somewhat subjective or theoretical. Philosophers argue about all that, just like verifiable, what he says under statement, which he says literally means, literally meaningful. IFF is something you see when you start reading philosophy or logic. IFF, which means if and only if. It's either analytic or empirically verifiable. But we're also concerned with the definition of verifiable and what it means when something is verifiable and who decides when something is or has been verified. Okay, so he classes the word verifiable into strong, conclusively established, and weak, probable. Okay, so just a little information there about statement versus sentence and writing versus utterance or spoken. So when we have procedures and processes, we have these days, current and modern times, we have writing things, plus we have spoken things, and there's a process that usually includes both, as well as some sort of act, like the shaking of hands, the exchange of rings and consummating a marriage, the hitting of a champagne bottle on a ship for naming it, or the president signing a law and then it being deposited into the library, being published, those kinds of things. Everything has a process. So Austin starts lecture 12 with, we have left numerous loose ends. So even though he has 12 lectures, he admits that there are, this is a loosely uh, put together book, but he says, but after a brief resume, we must plow ahead. How did the constitutives, performatives, distinction look in the light of our later theory? In general, for all utterances we have considered, except perhaps swearing, we have found: one, happiness or unhappiness dimensions; 1a, an illocutionary force; two, truth or falsehood dimension; and 2a, a locutionary meaning, sense, and reference. So really briefly, he says that, like calling someone out or giving a unpopular opinion is sort of the happiness or unhappiness of something. It doesn't void it, but it um, makes people sort of uneasy with it, unhappy with it. We say things like it's against public opinion, or the public doesn't like this opinion, or the players don't like the umpire's decision. So it makes it happy or unhappy, but it doesn't change anything. An illocutionary force is the intention we have when we say something. So if somebody says it's so hot in here, what they intend is for you to do something for them, which is to make it cooler. So your prolocutionary is to get up and open the window. So the illocutionary is what they meant by it. The locutionary is what they said. It's hot in here. So then you have the truth or falsehood dimension, whether something's actually true or whether it's false. And sometimes these portions of the process can void the process. A locutionary meaning, so the sense and reference of what is actually being said, the words being said. The illocutionary, the intent, and the prolocutionary is what you did or what you felt. Okay, the doctrine of performative constitutive distinction stands to the doctrine of locutionary, what you actually said; and illocutionary, what you meant by what you said; acts in the total speech act as the special theory to the general theory, and the need for the general theory arises simply because the traditional statement is an abstract, an ideal, something of the mind, and so is its traditional truth or falsity. But on this point, I could do no more than explode a few hopeful fireworks. In particular, the following morals are among those I wanted to suggest. A, the total speech act in the total speech situation is the only actual phenomenon which, in the last resort, we are engaged in elucidating. So it includes all three: the locutionary, the locution, perlocution, the locution, illocution, and perlocution. Stating, describing, etc. are just two names among a very great many others for illocutionary acts, the intention of having said something. They have no unique position. In particular, they have no unique position over the matter of being related to facts in a unique way, called being true or false, because truth and falsity are, except by an artificial abstraction which is always possible and legitimate for certain purposes, not names for relations, qualities, or whatnot, but for a dimension of assessment. How the words stand in respect to satisfactoriness to the facts, events, situations, etc., to which they refer. So he's basically talking about context of the situation and the words and who's speaking them. and what their intentions are, all of it has to matter. It all has to be related to how we interpret the situation or the words or the document, such as the Constitution. Okay, by the same token, a familiar contrast of normative or evaluative as opposed to the factual is in need, like so many dichotomies of elimination. We may well suspect that the theory of meaning, as equivalent to sense and reference, will certainly require some weeding out and formulating the terms of the distinction between locutionary and illocutionary acts. If this distinction is sound, it has only adumbrated here, adumbrated here. I admit that not enough has been done here. I have taken the old sense and reference to the strength of current views. I would also stress that I have omitted any direct consideration of the illocutionary force of statements. Now we say that there was one further thing obviously requiring to be done, which is a matter of prolonged field work. He talks a lot in this book and says a lot of things that I could probably just take out and shorten this a lot. But stick with me here. We're going to get into some types of words or classes of words and examples of those classes, which is important for us to look at when we're trying to read and interpret philosophy or writings by the government, and we're trying to understand what we're supposed to do with these things, how we're supposed to see them. So it's important to just stick with it here. We said long ago that we needed a list of explicit performative verbs, but in the light of the more general theory, we now see that what we need is a list of illocutionary forces of utterance. The old distinction, however, between primary and explicit performatives will survive the sea of change. Sorry for my typings. The sea of change from the performative constative distinction to the theory of speech acts quite successfully. For we have since seen reason to suppose that the sorts of tests suggested for the explicit performative verbs, to say, is, to, whatever, etc., will do, and in fact do, better for sorting out those verbs which make explicit, as we shall now say, the illocutionary force of an utterance. Of course, now illocutionary force is the intention. So, what is the intention of what someone says? Or what illocutionary act it is that we are performing and issuing that utterance. So, our intention of saying the thing, or the intention of what they want us to do, or what they're doing in saying the thing, the perlocutionary. What will not survive the transition, unless perhaps as a marginal limiting case, and hardly surprisingly because it gave trouble from the start, is the notion of the purity of performatives. This was essentially based upon a belief in the dichotomy of performatives and constatives, but which we see has to be abandoned in favor of more general families of related and overlapping speech acts, which are just what we have now to attempt to classify. Using then the simple test with caution of the first person, singular, present, indicative, active form, well, such as I am, that's a lot of words just to say I am, and doing through the dictionary a concise, and one should do, in a liberal spirit, we get a list of verbs in the order of the third power of 10. And his footnote is why use this expression instead of 1,000? First, it looks impressive and scientific. Second, because it goes from 1,000 to 9,999, a good margin. Whereas the other might be taken to mean about 1,000, too narrow a margin. I said I would attempt some general preliminary classification, and we make some remarks on these proposed classes. Well, here we go. I shall only give you a runaround, or rather a flounder around. So I think basically he's saying don't take this as set in stone. He's just sort of playing with this idea of types of or classes of words, sort of to lean us into a perception that we might have when we're looking at like things people say and what they mean by what they say and what they expect us to do by what they say or what they expect us to feel by what they say. Okay, so he's just sort of leaning us. I distinguish 5 more general classes, but I am far from equally happy about all of them. They are, however, quite enough to play Old Harry with, 2 fetishes, which I admit to an inclination to play Old Harry with. 1, the true or false fetish. 2, the value fact fetish. I call these classes of utterances classified according to their illocutionary force, their intention. What did you mean by that? What did you mean for me to think or do or say when you said that? The illocutionary force, what you mean for me to interpret by the following more or less rebarbative names: predictives, exercitives, commissives, behabitives, and expositives. Okay, so I summarize these in this way, so does he. He says verdictives are like verdicts: guilty, out, the court opinion, legislation. Exercitives are like executive orders, uh, military orders. Commissives, commitment, or to commit to something. I promise, or I hereby promise to, like on a traffic ticket, show up to court and then you sign it. Behabitives, attitudes, behaviors, apologizing, condoling, cursing. And expositives, to expose. They're expository arguments, conversations, debates. I reply, I argue, I concede, etc. Okay, so he continues, we shall take them in order, but first I'll give a rough idea of each. Verdictives, typified by the giving of a verdict, as the name implies, by a jury, arbitrator, or umpire, but they need not be final. They may be, for example, an estimate, reckoning, or appraisal. It is essentially giving a finding as to something, fact, or value, which is, for different reasons, hard to be certain about. 2, exercitives are the exercising of powers, rights, or influence, such as, my words are such as the president signing a document, a legislative passing an act, a commander giving orders to the troops. Examples are appointing, boarding, voting, ordering, urging, advising, warning, etc. Commissives, typified by promising or otherwise undertaking, they commit you to do something, but include also declarations or announcements of intention, which are not promises and also rather vague things, which we may call espousals. uh, because we've heard presidential declarations, and we hear these words and we're not quite sure what they mean. And he says they're not promises; they're kind of vague. We may call them espousals, for example, siding with. They have obvious connections with predictives and exercitives because the executive president of the United States of America, sometimes he'll write declarations or give an announcement. And they look like something, and maybe they're not really what they look like. The fourth, behabitives, are a very miscellaneous group and have to do with attitudes and social behavior. So these are our rituals, our religions, our traditions. Examples are apologizing, congratulating, commending, condoling, cursing, and challenging. I add here, like when you write a letter and we say, Dear so and such, and whatever. Respectfully, myself. We have certain social behaviors, shaking hands, we still shake hands. Some people fist pound now, different things like that. Um, expositives, X positives are difficult to define. They make plain how our utterances fit into the course of an argument or conversation, how we are using words, or in general, are expository. Examples are I reply, I argue, I concede, I illustrate, I assume, I postulate. We should be clear from the start that there are still wide possibilities of marginal or awkward cases or overlaps. The last two classes are those which I find most troublesome, and it could be well that they are not clear or are cross-classified, or even that some fresh classification altogether is needed. I'm not putting any of this forward as in the very least definitive. Behavatives are troublesome because they seem too miscellaneous altogether, and expositives because they are enormously numerous and important and seem both to include in the other classes at the same time to be unique in a way that I have not succeeded in making clear even to myself. It could well be that all aspects are present in all my classes. At least he's being honest with us. I think he's just trying to say, look, words have different meanings and sometimes we misunderstand them. And so let's try to make some classifications. Predictives. Examples are acquit, convict, find, as a matter of fact, hold, as a matter of law, interpret as, understand, read it as, rule, calculate, reckon, estimate, locate, place, date, measure, put it at, make it, take it, grade, rank, rate, assess, value, describe, characterize, diagnose, analyze. Further examples are found in appraisals or assessments of character, such as, I should call him industrious. Predictives consist in the delivering of a finding, official or unofficial, upon evidence or reasons as to value of fact or fact. So far, these are distinguishable. A verdictive is a judicial act. I also want to point out here that it matters the authority. So who is saying the thing? Who's saying the verdictive? Who's saying the expositive? Who's saying the exercitive? Who's saying the commissative? So these people have to be in the position to have power to say these words for them to actually mean something. Okay, so a verdictive is a judicial act as distinct from legislative or executive acts, which are both exercitives. But some judicial acts, in the wider sense that they are done by judges instead of, for example, juries, really are exercitive. Verdictives have obvious connections. So we've heard that judges can't make law from the bench because judges are not given executive power. They don't have the right to utter, I think it's exercitives, right? Um, they have only the right to give verdicts. So their words are limited, but even if they used words not in their class, they then don't have the power to use the force of those words. So they can say them, but what do they mean to us? They shouldn't mean much of anything to us because they don't have the power that comes with using those words. So a judge can't make law from the bench, so he can't do executive functions. So he shouldn't use executive type words or words that compel us to believe that we have to obey something, or that a judge has an executive power in those words. Okay, so if he uses executive type words, they don't come with the executive type power, they come with judicial power. And that's maybe more limiting. Okay. So verdictives have obvious connections with truth and falsity as regards soundness and unsoundness, or fairness and unfairness. That the content of a verdict is true or false is shown from example in a dispute over an umpire's calling out 3 strikes or foul balls. Okay, comparison with exercitives and official. As official acts, a judge ruling makes law. Okay, so we've been told judges don't make law, but they change law. They create the interpretation for the law. A judge's finding makes a convicted felon, and umpires giving the batsman out or calling a fault or a no ball makes the batsman out. The service of fault or the ball a no ball. It's done in virtue of an official position, but it still purports to be correct or incorrect, right or wrong, justifiable or unjustifiable on the evidence. It is not made as a decision in favor or against. The judicial act is, if you like, executive, but we must distinguish the executive utterance. You shall have it from the verdict. It is yours, and must similarly distinguish the assessing from the awarding of damages. So Austin appears, in my words, Austin appears to be saying in the future, you shall have it. This might be considered as a command or an order, or that something be given to you. This is opposed to it is yours, it belongs to you now. And this may be either you may continue to possess it as you do now, or you already own it and possess it and can take it. You already own it, but you don't possess it, so you can take it back because it's yours. The phrase you shall have it requires someone else to give it to you. The order then is on the giver to give it, as opposed to it is yours, which may mean you are awarded something so you can keep it. So assessing, you shall have it, and awarding, it is yours. Okay, so back to Austin. Comparison with commissives. So we're comparing verdictives with commissives. Verdictives have an effect in the law on ourselves and others. The giving of a verdict or an estimate does, for example, commit us to certain future conduct in the sense that any speech act does, and perhaps more so, at least to consistency, and maybe we know to what it will commit us. I have a book on um, inconsistencies in court opinions, and I think I'm going to go over that book in another podcast, the next one after we finish this book, this lecture. So when we finish this lecture, I'll start going over the other one on how judges write these court opinions and their findings, and none of it really makes any sense. And if you look at it logically and sort of follow it, uh, follow the propositions, that they don't work out. Some of them just don't work out. They're rhetoric. Okay, they're just there to try to persuade people. They're articles of persuasion, basically. They don't mean anything. They don't have any meaning in them. So Austin continues, thus, to give a certain verdict will commit us, or as we say, commits us to awarding damages. Also, by an interpretation of the facts, we may commit ourselves to a certain verdict or estimate. To give a verdict may very well be to espouse also. It may commit us to standing up for someone, defending him, etc. Persuading, right? That's persuasion. It may commit us to doing something. Sometimes that's just done in persuasion. So to compare verdictives with behavitives. To congratulate may imply a verdict about value or character. Again, in one sense of blame, which is equivalent to hold responsible, to blame is a verdictive. But in another sense, it is to adopt an attitude towards a person and is thus a behavitive. So he's saying these things kind of overlap, right? Comparison with expositives. So verdicts compared with expositives. When I say I interpret, I analyze, I describe, I characterize, this in a way is to give a verdict, but is essentially connected with verbal matters and clarifying our exposition. I call you out must be distinguished from I call that out. The first is a verdict given the use of words like I should describe that as cowardly. The second is a verdict about the use of words as I should describe that as, quote, cowardly. Now we move on to exercitives. There's a wide class of examples. We're listing about, I don't know, 20 or 30 here. No, about 20. Okay, his examples: appoint, degrade, demote, dismiss, excommunicate, name, order, command, direct, sentence, fine, grant, levy, vote for, nominate, choose, claim, give, bequeath, pardon, resign, warn, advise, plead, pray, entreat, beg, urge, press, recommend, proclaim, announce, quash, countermand, annul, repeal, enact, reprieve, veto, dedicate, declare closed, declare open. So it matters who's saying the word. If it's your property and you've got a will, then you have the executive power. You're either executor, you're named executor or executrix of a will, right? So an order, who has the power to order someone? Do the police have actual power to order someone to do something? Does a military troop have the power to come off a military post and order civilians to do something? Who's in command? Does a person in command have the power to actually command anyone, such as the president? If he has no military experience, he's never been commissioned as an officer, does he have the power to command the military? Fine. Who has the power to fine you? Who has the power to vote? Okay. You have to have certain qualifications to vote. If you have a claim, do you have the right to make a claim? All right, you get the idea. An exercitive is the giving of a decision in favor of or against, I'm sorry, I think that's in favor for or against a certain course of action or advocacy of it. It is a decision that something is to be so, as distinct from a judgment that is so. It is advocacy that it should be so, as opposed to an estimate that it is so. It is an award as opposed to an assessment. It is a sentence as opposed to a verdict. Arbitrators and judges make use of exercitives as well as issuing verdictives. So you know here that a jury might find someone guilty, but then the judge will assign the sentence. So then the judge is doing his executive function as a judge